Okay. Call to order the second monthly meeting of the Hendersonville City Council, February 24th, 2021. I have the agenda in front of you. And any additions you'd like to see to the agenda? If not, start right in with our presentations.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. We are pleased to present to you today the financial audit of the city for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2020. David Phillips, our auditors, are here to present. If anybody would like a hard copy, I have those available as well.
Is there?
Is this what we already have?
Yes.
David, you can say next slide.
Oh, you got it? Okay. Cool. All right. As you know, this is a little bit later than normal. Normally we're doing this before the end of the year, but there's a lot of challenges this year with COVID, and just also y'all had a system conversion that kind of just delayed things, and really across the state, a lot of things have been delayed just because of the situation that's ongoing. But if you don't mind, I think they probably have emailed y'all some of the stuff electronically, and all, what I'm planning to do this evening is just kind of hit the high points of the audit. But again, if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to interject, or if you would like to wait to the end, that is fine as well. All right, next slide. We'd like to remind everybody about the importance of internal controls. There's thousands of transactions that the city is doing, and it's very important that there's checks and balances in what is being done, that not one person can do it all. And so one of the things that we do as your auditors is we look at your significant internal control processes and we try to kick the tires. We try to make sure that, hey, did a transaction get properly reviewed? Did it get properly approved? Did it get coded to the right account and so forth? We look at bank recs to make sure that these are being done on a timely basis. And if we came across anomalies or issues, it's not only important that I let the two Johns and Brian all know about it, but it's very important that you know about that as a council, because you can't fix something if you don't know it's broken. And so again, that's some of the stuff that we're looking at as well. These are your financial statements. One of the nice things about your financial statements is it's a CAFR, which is a comprehensive annual financial report. And that's kind of a funky term, but it's a kind of a more robust financial report. And one of the really nice things in it is in the very back, there's statistical tables that give you 10 years of history. So especially if you're new to council or you're wanting to see how things are trending in a certain area, if you go back there and look, you can really get a good snapshot of kind of how the city's been doing over time, maybe what were some of the revenue blips or expenditure blips at certain times. It can give you a better picture versus having to go pull 10 of these off your website and looking at each of them individually. All right, next slide. Our responsibility as your auditors is to issue an opinion. We're looking at things from materiality. So, some of your materiality would be 1 penny. That's not ours. It's usually around, 1 to 3%. And so we're looking at significant transactions and samples of transactions to see how things are being operated and whether they're recorded correctly. And you've been issued an unmodified opinion. That's a good term. That means if we modified it, everything looks good except for something. And so we have an unmodified in the sense that we're not aware of any reason why we should modify our report. All right, next slide. All right, let's briefly look at your fund balance. Your total fund balance increased $1.2 million. I really think that chart is very helpful as you can kind of see how you've done over the past few years. Remember, the state has a formula where you have to set aside monies for stabilization. That amount is $2.5 million. And remember, in your fiscal year 21 budget, the one we're in right now, you assigned about $1.3 million of your fund balance in that budget. You have a little bit of non-spendable, but the real key category is here on the next slide, and that is the unassigned fund balance. Unassigned meaning that there's no constraints placed on that money. So it's available for your direction. And that balance is $4.7 million. And you can see that chart there is kind of held fairly constant for several years there. All right, next slide. All right, well, let's briefly look at your general fund revenues. They were $17.3 million. The biggest piece, as you can see there, is the $10.5 million in ad valorem taxes. You have a good bit, $5.3 million in unrestricted intergovernmental revenues, and then some in restricted, and then just other sources. This was a $1.8 million increase over the prior year, and largely in the ad valorem because this was reassessment, and boy did the values really shoot up, and you saw a lot of that benefit. As it relates to your budget, you came in over budget, and that's pretty impressive with a COVID year. We've had a lot of our governments see more of a flatter decline in some of their revenues. But you came in again over budget in the ad valorem category and in the unrestricted intergovernmental revenues as well. All right, next slide. All right, well, let's briefly look at your expenditures. They were $16.5 million. We kind of list the biggest buckets. What we normally see is that public safety is anywhere from about 45 to 60%, depending on the government that you're talking about. It did increase $1.2 million over the prior year, but remember, your total, almost all your cost is really attributable to salaries and wages and benefits. So if you remember, in your budget, you had a COLA, you had some paid-for performance adjustments. Remember, you had a number of more full-time staff being added, and then just the higher cost of benefits. Those are the biggest drivers, pretty much for every government, are your wage and benefits. But as it relates to the budget that you as a council approved, that John and Brian and John are all trying to manage to, they came in under budget. And for me as a council, if they want to spend more, they need to come to me, you as council, to get it approved and amended. And so the good thing is, as you can see, you came in significantly below your budget. There are some net transfers out to help with some capital projects, but those weren't that significant. All right, next slide. All right, let's briefly look at your water and sewer fund. Had a decrease in fund balance of about $700,000. We kind of list your revenue and expenditures, and a lot of the costs in there are just again for salaries and benefits. But I want you to look at all the projects that have been worked on, and some of these are still being worked on, and some new ones are coming online as well. So you had $10.7 million in additions, and we list a lot of that with the stream bank restoration, Etowah, the French Broad River, and you can just see all those. That's just a lot of activity. In your environmental service fund, had a slight decrease in fund balance. We kind of list a little bit of the metrics there, but the thing that was a little bit different this year on your additions front is you purchased a garbage and water truck, and that was kind of one of the more different or unusual things this year compared to maybe some other years. All right, next slide. All right, let's look at your capital assets as a whole. They're a total of $118 million. Remember, that's all your property. That's your land, your buildings. I know you don't always view this as property, but all those pipes in the ground, that is capital asset too. There's a lot of that. You had total additions this year of $14.1 million, and we kind of list the areas. And some of those we've already kind of discussed when we were looking at the water and sewer slide. Then, of course, when we capitalize something, we begin to depreciate it over its estimated useful life. And so, for example, if it was a fire truck, let's just say hypothetically, you said that pumper truck had a 10-year life and it cost $1 million, we're going to depreciate it $100,000 per year. And then after 10 years, it really doesn't have much value left. And so that's kind of what's taking place here. We mentioned at the very last bullet point some of the construction in progress that was in place at, remember, June 30th. We're already in February, so some of this stuff could have been closed out or almost completed, and other projects could have come online, but this is where we were back at June 30th. All right, next slide. I think I was telling John, you probably had about as many debt issuances that I've ever had in 1 year. If you look here, you had a total ending balance of $55 million in all of your long-term obligations. It increased $19.8 million. Then we kind of list all the, and remember, this is what's driving a lot of those projects that we were talking about. A lot of those improvements. So we issued a $12.9 million revenue bond. We used some of that to advance refund an old bond, but also to use some of the monies for future projects. Got a couple state revolving fund loans just starting. So I bet you this year that we're in now, there's even a ton more activity than when we were at June 30th. You issued a couple installment purchase contracts. Remember, one of those was for the PD headquarters, and that was really just getting going too at June 30th. It's probably a lot more in progress now than when we were there. You issued some capital leases for some vehicles, and so you had all those type of debt issuances there, but then again, you made principal payments on your debt of about $9.7 million. And then unfortunately, there's all these other liabilities related to pension plans, vacation accruals, OPEB plans, and all of those liabilities increased about $2.2 million over the prior year. The last bullet point there is just to kind of remind you of kind of what your annual mortgage payment is. It's kind of like when you're home, what you got to pay in the current year that we're in, and that's about $3.4 million. All right, next slide. Just want to remind you about COVID. I hope that we're getting all at the very back end of this. But if somehow variants, develop or this thing elongated and more lockdowns, it can have a real significant impact on a lot of governments. So right now, it's had not as great as I think a lot of people would have expected. And so again, our hope is that we're at the very tail end of that. Next slide. Wanted to mention to you there are some new accounting pronouncements coming down the road. One of them being this fiduciary activities, which kicks in next year, and it wants to, the GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, they set all the accounting rules for governments. They want to create more consistency on what is considered a fiduciary activity versus other types of funds. So at the end of the day, it could be a reshuffling of a couple funds moved to a different type of fund, but at the end of the day, the total doesn't really change. It could be just some movement there. The last one on leases is that they want you, if you enter into a long-term lease, they want you to treat it like debt. And so think about if you went out and you borrowed $1 million for a fire truck, you would record an obligation and you would record the asset of the fire truck. They're wanting you to do the same thing if you decided, hey, I'm going to rent a fire truck for 10 years for $100,000. I want you to set up this liability for $1 million, and I also want you to set up this right to use this fire truck asset for $1 million. So they want to treat everything kind of like debt. All right, next slide. There is a separate management letter that you would have received, and if we had significant issues with management, management was unwilling to record adjustments or difficult to deal with, we would have to report those type of matters. We didn't have any issues like that. It was pretty boilerplate. We did have to do a federal and state single audit this year. We had to look at 2 loans, and you can see those right there. And then we also had to look at a state drinking water state revolving fund loan too. And what's a little bit different about a single audit, we're not just looking at the numbers. We're looking to see, did you comply with all the grant terms? Like, if you were supposed to go get bids or all these different things, we're having to make sure, did you comply with all the significant compliance requirements? And when we looked at that, we didn't come across any issues. All right, next slide. All right, the last slide. I know everybody's happy. Again, the finance staff, they really were great to work with. This was a hard year on them. Not just from COVID, I think all of us would say COVID was tough, but they had a systems conversion going on, changing their whole accounting system. We had to work a lot more virtually. We may have inundated them with emails a lot more than they're used to, but it went really well in light of the amount of challenges that they were facing. Again, I want to remind you, you have an unmodified opinion. That's a good thing, so don't think of that as a strange term. That's actually good. And I think you have good financial condition as of the end of the year. Any questions? Because I know I kind of go quick sometimes. Yes?
Yes, this is a question. It's number 8 on here, which maybe that's slide 8. I'm not sure, but it's the top of it says Water and Sewer Fund Modified Accrual. But you have it in front of you, right?
Yes.
So this is a question about accounting. So is the depreciation expense of $3.3 million, is that included as an expenditure? So when it says expenditures are greater than revenues, is that $3.3 million part of the $17.2 million at the very top line?
When it's on the modified accrual, it generally is not.
Okay, so then the depreciation has no impact on that 17.2.
Right, but see, a lot of times like your principal payments will run through, and that's not viewed as an expenditure on the full accrual.
Okay,
So there's all these like conversions that take place on the bottom of that schedule.
Right, so that means that we actually spent $17.2 million.
More so, yes, sir.
Okay, I'm not an accountant, just asking. My other question is, this is page 10,
Okay?
and this is long-term obligations, and you have an other post-employment benefit liability, which is the last bullet before total debt service.
Yes.
So I'm asking, does that mean that we are properly prepared for potential liabilities in the future based upon retirees and things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, what all this is trying to do is to make sure you know what your commitment is to retirees for either their pension or their health care. And so those actuaries take your employees, they project it all, and then they say, hey, this is what you should be funded. The state, of course, is handling a lot of the pension plans, the elders, and so you're paying into that. And as the state does as a whole on that plan, your liability could go up or down whether they're collecting enough, whether they're earning enough on their returns, based on if people are getting paid out what they were expected. There's a lot of actuarial assumptions that go into it.
So in the opinion, I guess my question is, it appears that we are keeping up with our expected liabilities into the future?
I'm not aware of you not funding, your pension or anything like that to the level that they're asking you to, and the LGRs will cut you off.
Okay.
So
Jerry, what we're doing is, as it relates to our pension liability, yes, the city contributes as well as the employee contributes. It goes into the fund.
Right.
And over the last several years,
We talked about this one, yeah.
yeah, the state has adjusted their formula where they were saying they thought based on investments that they were using a 7% gain. The state treasurer invests our money, but they were using, in their actuarial, were saying we expect a 7% gain. They've never had 7% gains, and then they downgraded it to, I think, 3 or 4. And so the last several years, we have seen the city's portion of the retirement contribution go up. It's gone up every year. They were on a five-year cycle, Brian. Is that 5-year cycle? And we're like on getting ready to start year 4 or 5, and then they'll reevaluate it to make sure that we are. North Carolina's local government's retirement system is very well funded. It's one of the best funded in the state, but it was still about 92%, I think, if I remember. And before they were saying we were at 97 or 98, which is not right. So we've been trying to bump that up through raising the employer contribution. At some point, it's going to reach a critical mass, and so that's one piece. The other piece is, as it relates to post-employment benefit liability, is we do provide medical coverage for retirees that have been here for 30 years, and we've been funding that with cash. We have not set aside money, but that has been a cash contribution year in, year out in the budget. So,
yeah, so you set it aside in your budget, you're going to probably pay this amount of claims.
yeah,
Gotcha. Okay.
that's how we do it.
When's the next reassessment?
2024.
Any other questions or?
Is that every 4 years?
Yes, sir. 4 years. We're on 4 years later.
Other questions? Doesn't look like it. You covered it well.
All right.
We thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
David.
it.
Thank you, John. So we will ask, Madam Mayor, members of the council, we will ask Mr. Huffman to come across the hall, and if it's okay with the council, what we thought we'd do is we do have some members of the Chamber of Commerce that would like to address the council, but we thought we would let Mike Huffman do his presentation first, and then we'll allow the folks from the chamber to make their presentation, and then the council can discuss and deliberate from there.
All right.
Do you mind if I pull my mask down so I have my glasses on?
Not at all.
Get rid of it.
Thank you very much. This evening, this afternoon, I'm going to discuss some updates, what we've been working on with the Stormwater Utility study, and also just some general program activities that have happened in the last year while we're doing this rate study, and some goals moving forward for the program. Next slide, please. This is kind of just a brief overview. Stormwater Utility and rate study overview, and program achievements, program goals, our next steps regarding the utility study and structure, and then any questions or feedback that the council would have. No. So the next two slides are just going to be a brief timeline of the rate study itself, an overview of that project. So in May of 2019, we completed the Wash Creek Master Plan and preliminary CIP project. So we worked with Withers L to take a look at the Wash Creek sub-watershed, which is the west side of downtown, kind of from 6th Avenue down to near around Canoga Road. So they did an asset inventory and assessment. They also did some light modeling to look at how the stormwater system is functioning there, whether there's pieces of the system that are undersized, or also pieces of the system that are in need of replacement. And based on input from staff and then also some feedback from the community, we identified 5 priority areas that we wanted them to take a deeper look at the infrastructure and the stormwater drainage in that area. And from that, they gave us a list of 5 or 6 future potential CIP projects for that area. And the estimated cost at that time for those projects was around $6 million, just for those 6 projects. So at that point in time, council gave us the direction to look at a stormwater rate study. And so we kicked that off in September of 2019 with Withers Ravenel. And between September and January, so January of last year, we did a lot of data review and analysis, fiscal modeling, looked at CIP demands, looked at level of service options, and also did a lot of public outreach to the community. On January 21st last year, we presented to the council our progress at that point to get some additional feedback based on what your desired level of service would be for the stormwater program, what some different options are as far as stormwater rates, tiered structures versus the ERU structure, which we'll discuss in a little bit, and looked at some different revenue models for the stormwater program. So after that, we went back to the drawing board, but took that guidance from you all and refined some of our financial models, addressed the various feedback that we received. In March, we presented the updates based on that feedback, and then again in April, based on some additional feedback that we got in March and addressed between March and April, presented again at the April workshop for council. Next slide, please. So between April and July of last year, we did some additional public outreach. We did direct outreach to some of our top fee payers. We also did some public presentations and worked with some of the city boards and other community groups to present to them where we were at that point with the stormwater rate study and get their feedback. In July, so that was between April and July, during that time, council approved the increase in the flat stormwater fee from $3 to $5. And that's currently the rate that we're at right now. So every customer pays a flat $5 fee. We also presented to the Business Advisory Committee and the Chamber of Commerce to get their feedback. Between July and December of last year, we completed analysis. So we purchased new imagery from, we work with the county. Every couple of years they purchase updated aerial imagery, which the city uses for all types of different tasks, but specifically for stormwater, this is important on how we calculate the fees. So we had to purchase a special type of aerial imagery to calculate that. So we purchased that data, completed that analysis. We've been working on developing our ordinance, specifically tied to the utility structure and the rate. We've also been looking at several other programs that are typically associated with stormwater utility funds, so appeals processes, credit programs, and then also how we're going to implement the new rate if it is approved. Then in January of this year, we met with the Chamber of Commerce for their final feedback. that brings us to today. So the second workshop presentation. After today, between now and July, what we plan on doing is finalizing the updates to the ordinance, finalizing the credit and appeals processes, finalizing our billing implementation process, and then updating our billing data with the new impervious surface data, because the last data set was collected in 2015. So any changes that have happened in the last 5 years, new developments, things like that, that would be captured with the new imagery. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the stormwater utility? You guys probably know this as good as I do by now, but the stormwater utility is a dedicated source of revenue that is provided by user fees. You just saw the audit, so similar to like water and sewer utility fee or fund. So those fees are collected and they're used to pay for long-term compliance with state and federal regulations, which is what our stormwater program is, and also the ongoing maintenance, improvements, repairs, and expansion of the actual assets, so inlets, pipes, the natural and man-made assets that convey stormwater through the city. And the important thing about a stormwater utility is that it's a dedicated utility. It provides a critical tool to pay for the implementation of the program and also the replacement of aging infrastructure in the city through reserves and our ability to finance large capital projects. Those fees are established so that the community equitably shares the cost of improving the infrastructure and managing the stormwater program, and also the benefit that that system provides to private property. And a stormwater utility typically does not have any exemptions based on tax status, so that kind of ties back into the equitability side of the utility. Next slide, please. So this language here is actually directly from the general statute that gives municipalities the authority to collect stormwater fees, and it specifically outlines what stormwater utility fund money can be used for. So the fees are for providing stormwater management programs, which that's the program that the city implements to meet the state and federal environmental, EPA and state DEQ requirements. And also the structural and natural stormwater drainage system service, so operation, maintenance, and improvements to not just the pipes and stuff in the ground, but also the natural systems as well, because those are an important part of the stormwater system, because that's where all the stormwater eventually ends up. All those fees must be, all the revenue generated through stormwater utility fee must be made applicable throughout the entire area of the city. The fees can be collected, it says fees may vary according to the property type, whether it's a residential, commercial, or industrial property, the size of the property, and what we've looked at specifically is the area of impervious surface on the property. Roof area, driveway area, things like that, areas that shed runoff water into our system, to areas that aren't going to soak up rainwater like grass or field or things like that. So the rates and fees cannot exceed the cost of providing the management program and updating or managing the physical infrastructure, and it includes any costs that are necessary to ensure that all aspects of the stormwater quality. That's really where the stormwater management program comes into place, because at the core of that program is a water quality improvement program. And quantity, so that's where the pipes and the infrastructure really comes into play, is managing that quantity of runoff so that we don't have a lot of localized flooding and damage to private property and things like that. And all that has to be done in accordance with state and federal regulations. Next slide, please. So you guys are very familiar with this slide. This is what we kind of based a lot of our discussions off of, was the level of service matrix. So this matrix here does a really good job of outlining what all is incorporated in not just the permit compliance side of the stormwater program, but also the asset, infrastructure, operation, and maintenance side. So on the left side of the slide, you have your level of service, and then across the top, you have the different parts of the program. So, program management activities, as you can see, that's things like planning, so modeling the system, identifying areas where pipes might be undersized or doing asset inventories and things like that. And then also having implementation capabilities for our CIP plan, which, when we started this process, the stormwater program did not have any real CIP implementation ability because we didn't have any, revenue reserves or anything like that. Next, we have our NPDES, which is the acronym that stands for the Stormwater Management Program, basically National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. So the different activities that the city is required to do, so as you know, we're a phase 2 community, which means that we hold a permit that is administered by the state of North Carolina. And there are 6 minimum control measures within that permit, and we have to implement different programs to meet those control measures. So things like public education and outreach, but also things like going out and finding potential illicit connections to the stormwater system or places where there's illicit cross connections that might be directly putting pollution into a stream or water body. And then also our pollution prevention and good housekeeping program, which is all the different operation and maintenance activities and different parts of that program that ensure that the city's facilities and operations are not creating pollution and adding pollutants to the waterways. So that's the non-O&M related compliance activities. Those are things like public education and outreach. And then some of the O&M program activities are like our pavement management. So running a street sweeper, doing leaf collection and things like that. Those are actually required by our stormwater permit. And we do them. Public Works does a lot of that work as well. But when the state comes to audit our stormwater program, they're going to ask us, are you doing these things? The goal of all of those is to reduce pollution to our surface waters. And then finally, we have capital improvement projects. So what does the plan for capital improvement projects look like? Is it a 10-year plan? Is it a 20-year, 50-year plan? If you go to the next slide, please, or click through. I had some animations. I apologize. So this is kind of where, when we started, this is where we were. We were really kind of at a D/F level when it came to program management activities when we're talking about planning. So what was our plan for stormwater management? What was our CIP plan? What ability did we have to implement that CIP plan? We kind of started at ground zero. We didn't really have any of that. Permit compliance, that's kind of been what I've really been working on hard since I started here, is getting our program to a point where when the state comes to audit, I don't mean to go off track here, but we've had our permit almost 15 years. We've never been audited. So the state, in 2019, basically they said, we know we've kind of dropped the ball on auditing programs, so we're going to start auditing everybody. So our audit is this year. But so there's a lot of things involved in getting prepared for that audit. A lot of different programs that I kind of just went through, pollution prevention, illicit discharge, things like that. So our audits this year, I think we're doing pretty good. Proactive permit compliance. When it comes to the operation and maintenance program activities, we don't really have, or didn't at the beginning of this process, have an inspection-based program where city staff was going out and inspecting stormwater infrastructure. We weren't, having a routine inspection of catch basins or, routine inspection of stormwater lines and things like that. And what we found out quickly is that a lot of lines are old, and we were noticing things starting to fail. And that's kind of been an impetus to get to the point that we're at now. Is how are we going to address these issues? And then for capital improvements, again, we didn't have any plan, so we were below. So that kind of, if you'll click, put us at a D-, which is what it is. But based on all of those different programs and our discussions with council, if you'll go to the next slide, we decided, based on what it would cost to implement the different parts of that program at those different levels, the feedback from council was that we wanted to try and work towards being a level B/C program. That's, that's great. I think that's an awesome goal. And that would involve what you see highlighted kind of in the blue, a 20 to 60-year CIP plan, doing some routine and inspection-based operation and maintenance activities, maintaining our compliance with the state permit, and then having more ability to implement CIP projects, and then also having more planning for those CIP projects. So, and next, yeah, so this is kind of a, just cost-wise, where these fall. So keep clicking, please. So program planning, things like that, program management, and the permit compliance, those aren't nearly as costly as our capital improvements, because that's where we're really going to spend a lot of money putting new pipes in the ground, repairing old infrastructure, and things like that. Next slide, please. So these are the assumptions of that BC level of service that we landed on. The first one, and they're kind of broken down into the categories that you saw previously in the level of service matrix. So proactive management and replacement of prioritized capital assets. So going out, assessing all of our stormwater assets, and then prioritizing which of those assets are, need to be replaced today because they're failing, are, high, medium, low priority for replacement, and then using that prioritization to pick different projects to take on. Preventative operation maintenance activities, so implementing a routine inspection and maintenance program for our stormwater infrastructure, so cleaning out catch basins, if it needs to, cleaning pipes and things like that, and inspecting and routinely checking on those pieces of the infrastructure to make sure that, okay, this piece of pipe has 10 years left in its average useful life, or this piece of pipe has 50 years left, and that'll help us prioritize where we need to make investments. Having a compliant stormwater program, as I said, the state is auditing everybody right now. They've audited 50 plus communities out of the 122 that hold permits, and I can tell you that around 45 of them have notices of violation. So there's been a lot of work on the municipality side and the state side to bring everyone into compliance. And the state understands, that they haven't been keeping up with folks and making sure that their permits are implemented and fully being done correctly at the municipality level. We want to make sure we're a compliant program. And then those assumptions, so based on the cost associated with implementing that level of service and the financial modeling that we did, to reach the necessary revenue to be at that level of service, the fee that we were directed towards was a residential flat rate of $5 a month, which is where we're currently at with our residential. Every customer is at that rate. And then going from everybody being on a flat $5 rate to going to non-residential customers paying on an impervious, based on the amount of impervious surface they have, so an ERU structure. Next slide, please. And based on that, this is the revenue generation that we would assume with a $5 fee. So in 2021, we estimate around $1.4 million, going up to about $2.8 million in 2030, and a 10-year capital outlay of $36.5 million. And then also that would include two additional stormwater staff. Currently we have myself full-time, and then we have some salary splits for some engineering. Also, the street sweeper is funded through stormwater. Okay, if you look at the residential versus non-residential breakdown, so residential revenue, so this is annually money that's just from our residential customers at the $5 flat fee, that'd be $500,000. The non-residential revenue would be $900,000, so close to double that. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of some comparable rates, that I chose our closest neighbor, Asheville, and then also some communities that are similar in size to us that have stormwater utilities in place currently. Asheville, obviously their population is larger. One thing I want you to notice is the ERU size. So ours is higher than all three of the comparable communities. And also the population density side. Ours is higher than all three. So typically with a higher population density, you're going to have more urbanized area and things like that. More area that's going to create runoff. Higher demand on the stormwater system. And then over on the right side, you have your residential stormwater fees. So Asheville, they have a tiered residential structure. So they have 3 tiers that your residential property can fall into, and based on that tier, you pay between $3.20 and $7 a month. And then for their non-residential, it's $5.10 per ERU. For Shelby, North Carolina, Asheville and Shelby are the closest communities to us in western North Carolina that currently have a stormwater utility fee in place. Shelby population is close to ours, not, they've got several thousand more. Their residential fee is around $2.50, and their non-residential, they have a tiered system, so it ranges from $10 to $300 a month. Hope Mills, North Carolina, in the Piedmont, very close in population size to us. Their residential stormwater fee, again, they have two tiers, $4 and $6, and then a $6 ERU. Hendersonville, we're currently at $5 flat, and the proposal is that we would go to a $5 ERU structure for non-residential customers. Next slide, please. All right, so what are some of our existing infrastructure needs? Next slide. We got, just like most communities, stormwater was put in and it kind of was forgotten about until it failed. So a lot of our infrastructure is, reaching the end of its useful life. And, as I mentioned earlier, the system is, a lot of people think of the man-made system, the pipes and inlets, but there's also the natural part of the system, which you see on the stream banks and, things around that convey the water through the city, not necessarily, but ditches, creeks and things like that. Those also, at some point, need to be maintained. Next slide, please. Lots of situations like this where we have portions of infrastructure going through private property with no easements. So at this point in time, those pieces of infrastructure are the responsibility of the property owner, but they're carrying a significant amount of stormwater runoff during rain events. Next slide, please. And click one more time. These are just, if we don't deal with it, this is what we'll end up with: sinkholes on people's property. You all are very familiar with that issue that we've dealt with in the past. Next slide, please. And then also, a lot of the system was put in a long time ago, and we've grown a lot as a city. There's been a lot of infill, things like that. So lots of parts of the system that are potentially undersized. And that's going to lead to increased localized flooding and things like that, which, obviously private property damage and other issues, getting around the city can simply be an issue when the pipes are undersized. Next slide, please. So this kind of outlines the key components of the rate study. We did a lot of public outreach and tried to gather a lot of public input because obviously this impacts the public. We looked at specifically non-residential fees. We looked at credits and caps. So are we going to offer credits to people based on stormwater control measures that they've already put in, and also incentivize new development to put in stormwater control measures? Caps, are we going to, and a lot of this was based on feedback from council, so credits and caps, appeals. So caps, are we going to cap how much we're going to charge a month to people? Because some people, going from $5 flat rate every month to a non-residential structure, that's a big increase. So how do we, do we want to cap how high the fee will go? An appeals process. So, the data is not going to be perfect. If somebody or property ownership might change hands, things like that, people need to be able to have a way to appeal their stormwater fee and say, okay, I don't agree with what you've calculated my impervious surface area as, or hey, this property is not my responsibility, even though it could be listed to me on the parcel data. So we need to have a process where people can, come in and make an appeal and do that. A drainage assistance program, and then billing. And there's actually slides for each one of these, so I won't dive too far into each one right now. So for the public outreach, again, we did presentations to our business advisory committee. We did presentations with the Chamber of Commerce, also with the Business Morning Update group. That was the most recent one. We held an open house. We did direct outreach. We sent letters to the 30 largest fee payers under the new proposed rate structure and let them know what their potential fee would be and ask for feedback. We also attended the council conversations in last October and did have a stormwater survey that was open to the public and did several press releases about the stormwater rate study, the stormwater utility, and what is involved in that process. Next slide, please. So the biggest public feedback that we got, or public input that we got, was that the public wants us to provide a credit program for people with existing stormwater control measures. The public wanted us to to look at various cap scenarios, and that, also that we look at providing a drainage assistance program, because we do get a lot of folks that call Public Works or myself and say, look, I have a stormwater drainage pipe running through my property. How can the city fix this? And at this point in time, we don't have a program to address off right-of-way drainage issues or pieces of infrastructure that are not in our right-of-way or within a dedicated stormwater easement. Next slide, please. So to go over these and the equivalent residential unit in a little more detail. So that charge is based upon a parcel's total impervious surface area, just the impervious surface area. Based on our analysis of single-family residential parcels in the community, the average impervious surface area on a single-family residential parcel is 3,000 square feet of impervious area. So that is our unit, our equivalent residential unit. A non-residential user pays a multiple of that base residential unit for their impervious surface. Across all of the communities, there's around 100 in North Carolina that have a stormwater utility fee in place. This is the most common way of charging stormwater utility fees. It's also the most equitable because it's based specifically on the parcel's ability to generate runoff or their contribution to stormwater runoff. And so based on based on all communities in the state that have a stormwater utility fee, the average for 3,000 square feet is about $7, a $7 charge for a 3,000 square foot unit of impervious area. Next slide, please. So this is just a simple example of how that works. Again, it's based on the impervious surface area. So if a property owner has 9,000 square feet of impervious surface area, not the total parcel is 9,000 square feet, but the parking, roof area, those areas are 9,000 square feet. You would divide that by the unit of 3,000, so the multiplier would be 3. If the fee is $5 per unit, multiply 5 by 3, and that's their $15, that's their charge for the month. So that's how the ERU structure works. Yes, sir.
See something, when you're getting this, I know you got them from these, the aerials or whatever. How do, like, paver patios, do they go into the whole fact, because they're made where they'll, be somewhat impervious?
Right.
Impervious.
So based on the data that we have available, those would be classified as impervious area. And again, that's an important part for why we have an appeals process. At the residential level, where everybody's paying $5, it's not based on the amount of impervious surface you have on your single-family residential parcel. If a business owner put in a big permeable paver area, they could certainly come to this. That would, one, be a stormwater control measure, which is potentially, make them eligible for a credit. But two, if they said, hey, I have 50,000 square feet of permeable pavers, and I think that you're not capturing that, that would be the appeals process. And then they'd come to us and say, here's where that's showing up as incorrect, and we would work with them to adjust that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this it gives a good visual representation of why, why it's equitable to charge non-residential parcels based on the amount of impervious area that they have. So your average residential parcel has around 3,000 square feet of impervious area. And so for a 1.5-inch rain event, a pretty common rain event in this area, we get, lately we've been getting more like 80 inches a year, but traditionally 57 to 60 inches of rain a year. So for a 1.5-inch rain event, they're going to generate around 3,000 gallons of runoff off of that property. Your average non-residential, and these are average for our community, is going to generate 30,000 gallons of runoff from 1.5-inch rain event. Next slide, please. And the largest customer in our customer group would generate 1.25 million gallons of runoff for every 1.5-inch rain event. So if you extrapolate that out to 60 inches of rain a year, you're talking billions of gallons of water that are being created as runoff. And so that is, that's not the reason, but one reason why you want to look at our non-residential as a residential community. Additionally, these non-residential parcels, typically large parking areas, things like that, lots of cars driving there, oil, grease, tire potentially generated from those parcels. Next slide. Okay, so credits and caps. This is something that we received feedback from council and the public that they wanted us to look, that everybody wanted us to look at. So, and we presented several scenarios, and the latest feedback we got was a 50% reduction in the monthly fee if a parcel owner has a functioning and maintained stormwater control measure. So they're performing their annual maintenance, they're making sure that it functions properly. We currently conduct all the inspections, so we know, hey, this meets the requirements that we have in place, or it doesn't meet those requirements. So if it is functioning properly and maintained, 50% credit, so 50% reduction in your monthly fee. And then monthly fee caps, we modeled multiple fee caps ranging from a cap of $2,000 a month down to $250 a month. So if your fee monthly would be higher than that, it would be capped at that level. Next slide, please. So looking at those different cap scenarios, we have the cap level on the top. So we looked at $2,000 cap down to $250. The next row you have is the number of customers that will be eligible to receive that cap or would be affected by that cap. Then we have our annual revenue, and then what the actual loss would be based on those different caps. So 2,000, 2 customers would be eligible to get that cap, and our average loss on the year would be $8,000. If you look at it at $200, there's around 50 customers eligible for that, and our revenue loss would be around $275,000 annually. Next slide, please. So the Appeals and Drainage Assistance Program, we've covered the appeals program. Drainage Assistance Program, I think, is a really important part of, as we implement this, having this program and having it be active in the community, is a cost share program for drainage improvements outside of city right-of-way or dedicated easements. As one of the pictures I saw, we have a lot of infrastructure. Well, we don't have it. There is a lot of infrastructure where city drainage drains into a piece of pipe that runs across private property. Across the board, the way municipalities deal with that is that if it's not in a dedicated easement or within our right-of-way, it is not our responsibility to maintain because we don't have a record of putting that in. But those infrastructure fail just like the stuff in the right-of-way fails. Typically more often because it wasn't put in by the city, it was put in by a homeowner or a business owner that was just like, there's a ditch there, I need to get it in a pipe so I can build on this property. There weren't really considerations into sizing or material, things like that, but we've already seen the consequences of that. So this drainage assistance program would have a specific reserve of funds to help homeowners, property owners address drainage issues with the understanding that they're going to contribute some to paying for the repair of it and that they're going to give the city an easement over that piece of infrastructure. So in the future, if anything happens, we will be able to go in and maintain it and fix it. Next slide, please. The billing part of this. So we currently bill on a combined utility bill. That has several benefits. The biggest one is enforcement. So if someone doesn't pay their stormwater utility fee, we have the ability to have enforcement. Based on some things that we've been considering with this are that there are some places where there are properties with multiple tenants and one owner. Also, the impervious surface data is at the parcel level, so it's not very easy to say parcel there's 8 tenants and this tenant is responsible for 30% of the parcel and this tenant is responsible for XYZ percent. And then there's also some situations where the utility account is tied to a water meter. And we have some places where there are master meters, so there's multiple accounts fed off of that meter. So how do we deal with that? Based on internal staff discussions, we are planning to move forward with leaving it on the combined utility bill, and we'll address those specific issues on a case-by-case basis. It's not a huge amount of the customer group that falls into areas with master meters or multiple tenants on the property. So, next slide, please. Okay, so before I go into the program achievements and goals, are there any questions about the rate study, the utility study right now? Yes, ma'am.
So with the proposed plans, the rates are applicable to properties or parcel? By the property or the parcel?
So in this example, those two could be used interchangeably. So the parcel owner is the property owner.
Okay. But what about property, I guess where there are multiple parcels in a large property that may be utilized by multiple people?
So that ties back to the billing situation, like a strip mall or a shopping center or something like that. So on the parcel level, that's all one parcel. And then there are individual, they're not sub-parcels inside the parcel typically in those issues.
Okay. And then like multifamily units is another one I had a big question on. So
Right, so the revenue models that we ran assume that for multifamily units, anything above a single-family detached unit would be charged half of an ERU rate.
So can you give me an example of what you're saying?
So like an apartment complex, they would either be charged half an ERU based on this is one thing we're working out.
They as in?
They as in the
owner?
property owner. Yeah.
Okay.
So like a large apartment complex, they might have, this is one part that we're working through, but either based on the impervious surface value, so how much parking roof area they have, will apply half an ERU to that, so $2.50 per unit. Or do it by the number of dwelling units in that multifamily development.
And then if it was by dwelling units, then it would be charged at the residential rate by dwelling
No, it would be
units?
charged at half because since it's a multifamily, it's more dense, so you have multiple people living in the square footage that you would see on a single family lot. So it would still pass on that half an ERU to the, because if it's a two-story apartment complex, you have 4 people living in this impervious space that you would typically on a single-family residential lot would have 2 people.
Okay, then why would we give them half, why would we charge them only half the residential or the ERU if it was an apartment?
Because of the density of the development.
Okay.
Because you may have 3 units in the same square footage where you may have on a residential property, you may have 1 unit. Does that make sense? So basically,
Well, but not really, because if the property has a certain percentage of impervious surface, it doesn't really matter how many people are on that impervious surface, it's still all impervious surface. Or there's a percentage of impervious surface in that part, or on that property, right?
Like if it's Walmart or an apartment complex, the
Doesn't
impervious
matter, it's
surface
all-
is the same.
Right.
I think what Mike's saying is that like in my apartment complex, we live on a second level. So technically there's 2 people paying for one portion. Just like the impervious surface
But
is
you're not
double.
paying for
Right,
it.
the
It's
question is
going to the
who's
property.
getting the bill, right? It's the
But right
property
now,
owner.
we pay for it, right? So,
Correct. So currently it's on the water account.
Yeah.
So
That's where.
So that's where,
Okay.
there's just, there's several apartment complexes that have a master meter. So there's one account for the whole, or 2 accounts for the whole.
Right, that's what I'm saying, it's like so a lot of apartment complexes, their water is included. So the property owner is paying that bill, and in my opinion, they should be paying the same rate as a non-residential property.
If they have a master meter,
If they have a master meter.
right?
Yes.
And do they, if they have a master meter?
I mean, right now, currently, that's part of what we're, the billing portion, that's part of what we're working through. We assume, typically, what other communities will do is for multifamily, because it's a more dense residential situation,
Right.
they will charge it at half a unit, or a percentage of a full equivalent residential unit.
But that's the person who's actually getting a bill and it's on the bill versus the master meter where it's, that owner gets one big bill
Correct.
and the individual tenant does not get or at least doesn't get the water bill from the city.
Right, if you
Right.
run a 50-unit apartment complex, and you get the water bill, you get the only water bill for that, you should be paying the same as Walmart, essentially, for,
And is that the case?
Well, I mean, that hasn't been set right now, so that's part of the feedback that we want from you all, is like, if that's how you want it done, then we can certainly work that and incorporate that into the rate structure and say, we want multifamily to be treated equally as non-residential.
if they're on a.
If it's on a master
If
meter.
there are, yes, I mean, we can make that, that can be
Right, only if it's on a master meter.
right.
and then my other question is when you have residential communities, or communities that have like rate, like tiers, what are those tiers based off?
They're based off
Like situations
typically,
like that?
no, they're typically based off like the distribution of the single-family residential. So like in some communities, you know, it'll.
Like Asheville's, for instance.
Right, and I mean, one of the, I guess, what's the right word? So, you know, we could do that. We just have to look at every single residential family parcel and say, okay, this parcel has 2,000 square feet, this parcel has 4,000, this parcel, it creates a lot
So
more.
you're just trying to make it simpler.
It makes it a lot simpler to do the
Using an
residential.
average, right, of 3,000 or something.
Right, and you know, so we could say, okay, from 0 to 3,000, you're paying $5 a month. From 3 to 6, you pay $6. From anything above 6,000, you pay, you know, that's how the tiers are set up.
In our current residential program, the rate is scheduled to increase again, right? To 7?
I would have to look back. We talked about several different increase scenarios. So one big increase in 5 years or multiple small increases across the years. And again, all of those revenue increases are based on assumptions of what our CIP will be for the next 10 years. And so at this point in time, you know, the model that we used to determine the CIPs was based off the amount of pipes and infrastructure that we know that we have, and then the information that we got from Wash Creek. So as we move farther down the road and start tackling projects and get the complete assessment done of the system, that number could go up, it could go down.
With a $250 cap on non-residential, and there's a $275,000 projected loss
Correct.
with that cap, how much would increasing residential rates by $1.50, how much would that lessen that deficit?
I could say off the top of my head, no.
You can probably get for every dollar on the fee, you get about $125,000.
That's with everybody paying that dollar, right? So you take, you know, I think of the 10,000 accounts, 2,000 of them are non-residential, or, you know, on
You
this.
get
So,
80% of that.
yeah.
It's about 80,000.
Did you say 80%?
80, it sounds like if you say we had 10,000 accounts and about
Roughly.
roughly about 2,000 are non-residential, then 8,000 are going to be residential, so that's about 80%, right? My math is right. So then if we get 100,000
Okay.
for every dollar, then you really, what you're talking about, Jen, for $1 would get you about 80,000 per dollar. 80,000 new money. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Just because you're just raising it on
Right.
the residential side.
Right. And do we currently have projections for what our residential, I can't remember right now, like what it was, because I thought we had voted on a plan to increase those,
We did, they are at $5 currently, so they wouldn't change.
but I thought there was a plan to
There
increase.
is a plan, when we showed you originally, there was a plan that showed you incremental, then I think, I'm trying to remember
It
the number.
started out lower than.
Yeah, it started out lower.
And then we
said
decided not
started
to.
Not
high.
to do that, and just go ahead,
Yeah, you looked at going $5 and $10 and then
yeah.
on 5-year increments,
Okay.
is what I remember.
Okay, sorry.
No, this is what we're here for.
Is it, okay, so businesses, right, that are in the city right now,
Yes.
that are being damaged repeatedly by flooding, do they purchase and they have their own business flood insurance policies? Does that exist? And do these insurance carriers, whether it's out of the state of North Carolina or an insurance carrier somewhere else, do they eventually, or do they get to a point where they will not offer flood insurances to people in a specific area? Or can they, or would they ever get to a point where they would not allow a business to maintain that type of rider on their policy if the city was not in compliance in some way, shape, or form to a stormwater program?
There's no relationship between flood insurance that I know of and the availability of, or the compliance of the stormwater program and the availability of flood insurance. There's FEMA buyouts where like FEMA will say, this property's been flooded 25 times.
Okay.
We're gonna look at buying this property out and returning it back to floodplain. Like, we're not gonna allow anybody to develop this site. far as any insurance companies not renewing an insurance policy because of past claims, I can't speak to that.
So that's, I mean, like, since we haven't had an audit, and, you know, you kind of told us a really large number of people who are not in compliance with their audits, I just feel like eventually somebody's gonna start looking at how do we recoup this money if this is a pattern in these communities where they're doing nothing, or maybe they're not meeting the level of what we think they should to protect these properties, and then would that ultimately affect the business's ability to, you know what I mean?
I understand that question, yes. So the audit of the stormwater program, they are not, just to put it bluntly, they're not what our, capital improvement plan replacement
Right.
is. At the state level, the stormwater program is a program to improve and maintain water quality. So they're focused on, are we doing public outreach and education? Are we doing the pollution prevention, good housekeeping, illicit discharge, things like that? Not, are we mitigating flood problems for different businesses in the community? So I don't foresee that there would be, the way that their program is set up, they're not trying to incentivize or make communities reduce flood claims.
Okay.
But,
Now they're not.
but I would say, so two different programs. There's a separate program that is managed,
So we have a floodplain program that is separate from the stormwater management program. So we have a floodplain and flood risk, we have a floodplain administrator, and we have a flood protection ordinance that says people can't develop in certain areas, there's non-encroachment areas and things like that. And if you want to try and develop in that area, you have to submit permitting and go through a process with floodplain administration and Army Corps of Engineers, and show that you're not going to cause a rise in floodwaters, or that if you do, you're going to submit a letter map revision that says this is where floodwaters are going to change. That's not tied to the stormwater management program. So we as a community regulate development in the floodplain and in these flood zones, and there are insurance, I don't want to speak to insurance because I'm not familiar with that process as it applies to like someone making a claim, at least not, in my professional position. I know what I know from what I've heard, but there are things that the county and the city can do on a building code and assessment of the community level that affect flood insurance rates, but that's outside of the stormwater program. That's like a community rating, CRS or something like that. I wouldn't be the best person to speak on that.
Yeah, because I know homeowners insurances in the state of North Carolina have recently increased substantially. And there was some sort of law that was changed that allowed insurances to increase their rates based off of certain events that were occurring and claims that they were having to pay. So I feel like ultimately the insurances are always looking for somebody to blame or recoup their money from, and then that's just like a concern of just making sure that we're compliant and doing everything that we can to
Certainly.
so okay.
Yes, sir.
You showed us earlier a slide that had Asheville and Hope Mills, and they had the ERU system. And I was asking, in those communities, do they have caps?
So Asheville does not have a cap. Hope Mills does not have a cap. Shelby, the highest fee someone would pay would be $300.
Right now, I got Shelby.
Yeah.
So in Asheville and Hope Mills, there's no cap.
No.
Wow. That's a big deal for some people, I would assume. Next question. The appeals process only applies to non-residential, correct?
Well,
Is there any circumstance where a residential person would be appealing their $5?
there could, we don't have to say that it is only applicable to non-residential, but I don't think it would be likely that someone, because it's tied with a water account. So, if you're not, I don't foresee that situation, but I wouldn't want to say, no, we're not going to accept appeals from.
No, I'm just saying it's really designed for people who are non-residential, who are fees are
Correct.
$5.
Correct. Because at the residential level, the fee isn't really based off of the amount of impervious surface on the property. It's just a flat fee.
It's easier just to...
So the appeal, process would, someone could say, I think you miscalculated how much impervious surface I have on my property. data, we would look at their data and, say, yeah, we made a mistake, or, no, we didn't make a mistake.
Right.
And then that's, that would be the appeals process. Or, there's other situations that could arise, like I said, where either this is not my property anymore, it's changed hands, or, there's something like that.
Okay, on the drainage assistance program, do you have another program to model ours after?
Certainly, lots of communities have, High Point, lots of communities have drainage assistance programs. And it's really how, how the council, how we want to set it up. You can determine, you can make it as complex as you want, or you can make it as simple as you want. There's some communities that they say, based on the priority of the project, this is how we're going to schedule it, this is how much we're going to contribute to fixing it. And then there's other communities that say, we're doing 50-50 cost share with you.
Right, so my question is, in that program, are we fixing it, or are we helping subsidize somebody else fixing it?
So in that program, we would get an easement, so it would become our infrastructure, we would fix it, and they're helping us to pay for the cost of fixing that, so that their property is still,
So your idea is that we actually do the repair ourselves?
it would become part of our maintained infrastructure.
So part of the assistance would be we get an easement?
Correct. I mean, that would be a requirement of the program, because that way we're not repairing infrastructure on private property, and then basically next time something happens, we don't have an easement. It starts the whole process over again. So we would want an easement for every, that'd be a requirement of the program, is that you grant us an easement for that piece of infrastructure.
And then whatever subsidy, whatever subsidy they pay just goes back into this fund?
Correct.
This pot of money, right?
Right. Well, it would go towards the cost of the project.
Right, but I mean, it's our people doing the work, right? So
Not necessarily. It could be a contractor, because
that's what I meant, okay.
Yeah, so we would pay, at this point in time, our public works staff does not have the, time or ability to address these issues. So, and that was part of our assumptions, what we looked at was, are we going to contract out this stuff, or are we going to do it internally? And, contracting it is a good option, especially based on the level of service that we're aiming for. If we went to level A, we looked at we'll bring everything in-house, but that's, then your rates are sky high, and you're hiring 15 new people.
So we're basically a contractor to do the repair to our specifications.
Exactly.
And they pay us back a portion of that to the contract.
So we would handle, we would do the design,
Right.
Or we would hire a consultant to design that new piece of, or repair piece of infrastructure, and then we would have ownership of it after the project was completed.
Got it. We have no idea what that would cost us.
No, it's on a per case-by-case basis.
Okay.
And based on the number, we could change the fund, not this fund, but we could change that drainage assistance program fund based on how many requests we get. Okay, we're getting 5-10 requests a year. In my opinion, I think that's a great program, and especially for this community where we do have a lot of private property stormwater infrastructure, I think that should be a focus of the program, and a priority is our drainage assistance program. And that's the biggest benefit back to the community, in addition to improving our own infrastructure around.
Jerry, remember we did one like that with Ms. Thomas on that.
Yeah, but we actually had to go in and do a repair there last year.
Oh, yeah, no, I totally
It's
get it.
50-50.
Yeah, my question is, with the fees that we're proposing here, is there enough money available to be able to subsidize this work with the fees that we're talking about charging?
Yeah, so I was gonna make a comment about that, do we establish a cap per year of, a drainage assistance fund? And then that money is, on a yearly basis, and then when we run out of it, we're sorry, we are out for 2021,
Can
and
you
then can we apply
prioritize
to 2022?
Those are great questions. Those are parts of the program that you all have direct influence on. If you say drainage assistance is our priority, we're going to put 30% of the revenue in this, and then you could say, yes, at the end of the year, if we're out of money, we can't help anybody else. Wait till next year and apply. Or that's all
So
stuff.
didn't you say that at some point you look at prioritizing the ones that are,
That's CIP, that's our
I
capital.
thought we were still talking about the other, that if you get a lot of these requests in, you have to prioritize the ones. You're not going to go.
Well, no, that's how we set the program up. That's kind of okay, we have a drainage assistance program. Some places Raleigh, North Carolina, they have a drainage assistance program where you come, you apply to the program, and then you rate your project on a scale of like top, priority, 1, 2, 3. If it's a top 3 priority, which means that there's like imminent flooding happening on your property, or there's a big sinkhole or
That's how I
something.
think.
Or, or you could set it up where someone applies to the program and basically it's a 50-50 cost share. There's multiple ways that can be set up. And you can determine, okay, we're all gonna offer this percentage to, a high priority project because it's gonna cost more money, or we just say 50-50.
And is that done through, like a special assessment and then they would be billed through their tax bill, or how would that be done too?
So that would be part of, that would be part of the program that would need to be figured out. We wouldn't put a special assessment on their stormwater fee. We would say, here's the contract, it typically is done like, okay, you're gonna pay this much for 10 years on your taxes for us to recoup that money, if they don't have it up front.
Yeah, and
That is a good
just
question.
because I like offering something like that, because, for a lot of homeowners, they, took a mortgage out for what they could afford to live with, and, they get this $28,000 or $150,000 repair that needs to be done, or something like that. And if there was a way to space it out, because if it's gonna be escrowed through their tax bill anyway, you know what I mean, like if their mortgage is escrowed, then it at least lessens the burden on them.
Yes, I'd say you could do that. I would just say you would want to take that into consideration when you set your cap,
Yeah.
because you'll need more money because the city's up fronting that money.
City money up.
Will be more city money up front.
Doubling that up.
Right, well, that would be part of figuring out how much we could afford per year,
Yeah.
and essentially how much we could afford to float for 5 years or whatever, with, coming in. But I like the idea of doing that. So.
Right, so I guess with the fee structure that you're recommending, part of the decision is what percentage of that money goes towards this program? I'm talking about the drainage assistance program versus capital improvements.
That's a decision that needs to be made, but I'm trying to understand the question.
The question is, if we have a pot of money and it's 100, what percentage of that 100 do we want for drainage assistance, and what percentage do we want for capital improvement? Is that what you're saying we have to decide?
Eventually, yeah, but not right at the same time if we approve the new rates.
Okay, no, I'm saying that eventually, because
That's part of the work that say you want to do this in July, that's part of the work we do is flesh out that appeals program and say, okay, if you apply to this or not the appeals, sorry, the drainage assistance program, we would say, council, 50%, 80%, do you want to fund the whole thing? How much percentage of the revenue from our utility fund do you want to put into an assistance program? Things like that.
Okay. A decision should be made later. Okay.
Oh, okay, last question.
You can ask me as many questions as you want. That's why we're here. So.
I assume that there will be established some sort of a frequency or an inspection of people's SCM.
I inspect everyone annually, currently, and
And there will be a reporting or a violation?
last year I issued 30 notices of violation. They've all been resolved. So.
Okay.
30 out of how many?
120. But so for some of those are like small issues, like they're not mowing or maintaining the vegetation. Other ones, it's like your underground detention system is blocked up and it's not draining. So
But they would not be able to receive the cap or the discounted rate during their period of non-compliance?
No, I would, basically, because we're saying we're going to do the inspection. So I come out and inspect it, or, a stormwater technician would come out and inspect the facility. They'd say, it's not in compliance with the design that was approved in the plan. And what, the way I typically handle it is I send them a letter, I say you have 90 days to contact me and work on getting back into compliance.
Okay.
And then at that point, we'll resolve the notice of violation. Now, if somebody just ignores us and says, we're not going to fix it, then at that point, we would, say,
Yeah,
well,
because it's not
okay.
fair if they're getting the benefits of having a program in place and then they're not actually maintaining it.
Yeah, and from my experience, a lot of these systems go in and people just don't maintain them.
Right.
And some of them don't have to be maintained as often as others and things like that. Some of them are a lot simpler to maintain.
Right.
But in my experience, I haven't had anybody say, I'm not going to fix that.
Yeah. But.
This would be extra incentive for them to do that.
Right. But I don't think they should get the discount if they're not fixing their stuff.
Agreed, but we wouldn't immediately say you're in violation for the next 3 months until you fix this. We're not going to give you, we'll give them some time to bring it into compliance. All right, well, I will continue on. I think we've only got a few slides left. So I just wanted to provide you guys with an update. We did in July, so kind of just give you an update of what we've been doing in the stormwater program, what our goals are for the next, several years. So for our program achievements, we have some operation and maintenance. We've been preparing for the audit, some water quality improvement projects, public outreach projects, and then some additional CIP development and asset management projects. Next slide, please. So on the operation and maintenance side, and this is something that I really, is going to develop more as the utility becomes more established, because we'll be working with our public works department to kind of flesh out what daily operation and maintenance activities are they doing that are really stormwater maintenance activities, like I mentioned earlier, leaf collection and things like that. Like, that's a public works job, but that is required by our stormwater permit, and it benefits directly the stormwater system. But to go over this, so some drainage system improvements. This is just in the last 6 to 8 months. Public Works has done a good bit of ditch maintenance. We're planning to do some improvements on Jonas Street. Made some small improvements in the Woodmont-Ashby neighborhood. We did repair a sinkhole on Miss Thomas's property that happened recently after the last repair. We do have the project on 4th Avenue that we're looking at, that we're planning to do, and then also some drainage improvements along the Greenway. The stormwater program helped fund some of those materials for that. And then, as I mentioned, the SCM inspections. So I conducted 120 SCM inspections last year and issued 30 notices of violations that were resolved. So that goes a long way towards making sure that the places that do have control measures in place, that they're functioning properly and controlling their stormwater. Next slide, please. Okay, audit preparation. The audit is, it's coming. It's going to be a big 2-day thing. They're going to send people from the state to look through every aspect of our program. So there's been a lot of staff training that we've been doing with our field crews on pollution prevention, good housekeeping, illicit discharge detection. Also, making sure that we have standard operating procedures developed for all the different aspects of the stormwater management program as it pertains to permit compliance. Reviewing all of our documentation to make sure that we're documenting the necessary things that we need to document for the audit, and also making sure that we have all that information organized, and then also spending a lot of time going to different webinars and workshops, learning about the audit process and what the state is expecting of us as a community when they come to do the audit. Next slide, please. So some water quality improvement. Again, like I said, from the state perspective, stormwater management program, our main goal is water quality, to improve and maintain water quality for the community. So we did complete the grant work in Patton Park, and were awarded a grant for green infrastructure on 7th Avenue. Litter reduction, for some members that have been on the council for a while, you'll remember the trash trout project. So I was out there today for 3 hours cleaning it out, and so far this year, we've removed around 1,200 pounds of trash. Total in the 4 years it's been in, it's about 5,000 pounds of trash, 5,200 pounds of trash we've removed over the course of the last 4 years. So that project is working great. Education, as part of one of the grants, we purchased several educational signages to go around Patton Park with the improvements that are made there to create what we're going to call the Patton Park Stormwater Stroll, an interactive walk where you can go around the park and learn about different water quality improvement and stormwater treatment measures that we have there. Next slide, please. Those pictures didn't come up. If you did see the pictures, it would have been the murals at the Greenway that we've just completed in December with the Young Girl Scout, and then also a picture of a workshop that we held for local landscapers and homeowners about small-scale stream bank restoration. We had about 50 people attend, so it was well received. And so what we're currently working on the asset management CIP development side, so we're well into phase 1 of our asset inventory and assessment project. So that, basically an extension of what was done in Wash Creek. We're having crews go out, a contractor crew go out and look at, locate all of our inlets and stormwater infrastructure and then also, take pictures and assess the condition of those, and then they will return that back to us, and we will have a complete view of where all of our assets and infrastructure are, and we can use that moving forward for modeling and things like that to work on developing more CIP projects. And we also completed the impervious surface analysis in the CIP development, so we took a look at that Wash Creek master plan and identified an area where there were 3 specific projects in close proximity, and we're doing some design survey work there to prepare for implementing some of those projects in the next few years. Next slide, please. And so these are some of the program goals moving forward. Next slide, please. So again, our big focus is CIP projects and asset management. Starting out, we didn't have any type of asset management program. We didn't even know where all of our assets were, and that's really the first step in having a program that is able to properly plan for what we need to replace, prioritize what we need to replace, and have a responsibly use the funds that we're asking for. We're going to plan on doing the second phase of the stormwater asset inventory. The first phase, they do it on a per structure basis. So the first phase looked at 1,050 structures throughout the community. So they classify a structure as like an inlet or a manhole. And as you can see on the bottom, that dashboard image there shows a clip of the work on that. The plan is to develop an asset inspection program. So once we know where all the assets are, we can go out and start routinely inspecting them and creating work orders for them, making sure they're routinely maintained, identifying issues. And another part of the asset inventory project is that they're going to take all that data and put it into what's called a utility network for us that we can then deploy into our GIS system. There's lots of capabilities tied to that, being able to track up and down the network to see where things are, estimate things like where a big capital project would need to be done. And then for CIP projects, our goal in the next year to 2 years to complete one of the identified Wash Creek CIP projects and begin identifying and designing additional CIP projects. And then obviously complete the grant for the 7th Avenue green infrastructure improvements. Next slide, please. So where do we see the program development going in the next couple of years? So staff, adding 1 to 2 full-time positions in like a stormwater technician capacity to help with a lot of the routine inspections, inspecting the assets, stormwater control measures, doing facilities inspections for the city. There are several facilities that need to be inspected regularly. That goes back to our pollution prevention, good housekeeping measures, and our stormwater program, and implementing all the parts of that program. Additional water quality monitoring, assisting with public outreach and education, so being more active with our schools and the community as far as educating them about stormwater. And then they would assist with overall program implementation. Our permit, is to complete the permit audit, and then as part of that process, basically what they're going to do is they're going to look through our program, they're going to let us know what we're doing right, what we can improve, and then we have to resubmit for we have to renew our stormwater permit. So I renewed it in 2017, this will be 2022, it's a 5-year permit is when we'll be up for renewal. So this year, going into next year, we'll get all the feedback from the state and incorporate that into our community stormwater management plan, which is a plan that documents all of the things we're doing to be compliant with the state's permit. And so we will, get that plan approved with the state. That's 2 to 3, 4 month process. And then for the utility program, again, develop the drainage assistance program. And another thing that that I think is going to be an important part of this is establishing a stormwater advisory board or committee and I've got a slide on that. And then review and update the stormwater ordinance ahead of implementing the new rates. Next slide, please. So the Stormwater Advisory Board, this is another thing similar to the Drainage Assistance Program that I've seen with a lot of communities that have a stormwater utility in place, is that you have an advisory committee made up of different stakeholders in the community, so technical people, other engineers or things like that, people from the development community, the business community, residents, people from maybe the environmental group, and their role on that board is to provide input on what the community expects of our stormwater program. What are the expectations and goals? Do they want to focus on reducing flooding? Do they want to focus on improving water quality, increasing the green infrastructure in the city? Also reviewing our annual stormwater plan and, making recommendations on that. And then finally, reviewing appeals and drainage assistance applications. So that could be a potential role of that board is, if somebody makes an appeal, that board would review it and then make it, or that could still be something that the council decides on as well. But that is an important piece that gives the public a constant input into the program and ability to influence where the program goes. Next slide, please. For water quality improvement, we've submitted a grant for the south side of town. The city owns several parcels down there to look at some stream and floodplain enhancement restoration opportunities. So that would be a planning grant that would identify specific projects. We want to continue to pursue looking at opportunities to implement green infrastructure in the city's right-of-way, similar to what we're getting ready to do on 7th Avenue. As I mentioned, the trash trout is working beautifully. We'd like to try and maybe implement a few more smaller devices around the city to continue to keep that aquatic litter controlled and able for us to get it. Another part of that is potentially trying out some inlet guard pilot projects. So that would be like at the source, at the inlet, blocking trash from getting in. And then additional water quality monitoring to understand, what pollutant loads we're getting, how we can potentially offset that, and improving our water quality. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to wrap it up, our next steps would be to, draft an ordinance that would put the stormwater utility in place, and then associated policies, the appeals, drainage assistance, credit and cap policies, how are we going to establish those? Complete billing setup with our customer service and billing staff. Our asset inventory and CIP development for forever. Evaluate public works stormwater activities and how we will work that into the stormwater utility, how that cost will be shared, and implementing the non-residential rate structures. And so that's our next steps. And I think next slide, that is the end. Any other questions, feedback, comments?
Nothing left for Mike. I know we have some folks from the Chamber of Commerce that want to address the council.
Well, thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate it. And if you do have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to John or me, or I'm happy to provide anything.
So Mike, why don't you grab a seat right here
I would love to.
beside Angie in case there's questions after the chamber folks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was very comprehensive and
Thank you, Mayor.
very informative. All right. Who is monitoring? I think this is coming in right now. All right.
We're spread out.
Okay.
So, if whoever's going to speak, if they'll speak from the podium, and then John can come on in. You want to circle down back there, Mr. McKibben?
Hi, good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I know we are in a late hour here, so I will do the cliff notes for you. This here, I'm Ernest Humphreys. I'm the plant manager for Kimberly Clark, as you can see on my map here. And obviously, we would be at the top end of the rate structure for this, so closer to the $1,500 to $2,000 a month versus the current $5 a month. So the recommendation for the $250 a month is still 50 times what we're currently paying today. And our thought is that we would go slow with this to understand, grasp the situation, and raise the funds, and then have report backs semi-annually, right? There may be a report we sit down for making, and continue to build a plan from there. And it would be a 2 to 3 year rate progression idea. So maybe it starts at 250, and after a few years it increases. The other concern that we have, especially at the top end of the pay, is what impact would we have? What realization would we see of the benefit? Or are we paying for the community's benefit with no benefit to industry, so to speak? So those are things that we're concerned about. You talked a lot already about the billing structure. There are lots of questions, and the team has done some great work. Let me say that as well. They've taken a lot of our input, and I saw it in the presentation, right? The build on what they've learned and those are the highlights. Like I said, that's the Cliff Notes version for this late hour. I don't know if anyone else has anything they'd like to add.
But I would like to add, would like to thank Mike and John. They've been very good to sit down and talk with us and go over the plan and give us feedback and good information on that we needed to help us with our decision making. And I think I read that this is being set up as an enterprise fund. But the one concern that I have is we haven't seen what kind of parameters are put around that enterprise fund for how those funds can be used. I think as we've gone through, we've heard from time to time that, one department did pay for this, now we're shifting it over to stormwater fees. So what are the rules around how those funds can be used? We'd certainly like to see that. And clear definitions on the credits, what counts as a credit and what wouldn't count as a credit. That would be helpful too as we move forward. And obviously, we want clean water and good drainage in the city of Hendersonville and all across the community. We certainly support that. We're just looking for the best ways to get there and have the least impact on business. Thank you. Do you want to add anything, or are we good? No, I appreciate it. Any questions for us, or just we're here?
And trust us, we're from the government.
All right, should we go back in the small room and?
Thank you.
All right, so we go back to the small room? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So are we making a decision tonight on this cap amount?
So that would be helpful, as far as, you got one thing
Put
for,
that slide back up, so.
that would be helpful for us as we start budget development. So that's the main thing. Obviously, that's ultimately up to council whether you're ready to make a decision tonight, but it would be very helpful as it relates to the budget. And further development of the program. Because by knowing the cap, we know the number of eligible customers and those kind of things, and we have to dig down into the data to see how we would implement the cap with those folks.
How long has Asheville had a non-residential ERU?
I'd have to go look back, but it's been 10 plus years.
Of any of those numbers, but it doesn't matter which one. The numbers that are represented up there, are those all entities that would not get the half rate?
No, so in that list are entities that's a discussion that we've also had, is those entities, that 50/27, that's not excluding people that would potentially be eligible for the credit. So
for example, all the shoes are 52. Some of those 52 may be getting the credit because they have measures in place.
that's a decision to be made. That's a decision to be made. Like if you're going to get the cap of 250, do you still get the credit? That's a policy decision to be made.
But what you propose is half, if you have those in place, and we use the ERU amount, half you get basically half rate.
Yeah, you would get a 50% reduction.
I mean, I feel like if you qualify, and I think we talked about this last time, was if you qualify for the cap, then you wouldn't get the credit. You get whichever one, I guess, is better. If you don't get both, you get whichever one is better. I don't think you should get both, because like if you're already gonna be capped at 250 and you're supposed to be paying us 2,000,
Well,
another 50% on top of that is,
Right, then you pay 125.
yeah. And I think originally, because we talked about 1,500 as a cap.
So, originally, the council had discussed the 1,500, and I think at that time, we were gonna let you have both. We were gonna let you have
Correct.
the credit and the cap at that $1,500 number. One of the things that we talked about, that Mike and I bounced around, looking, wherever you end up on this scale, if you were down at the 250, that may be the point that you don't have the credit, because if you look at those. But again, Mike said, that's a policy decision for city council.
I'll use Kimberly Clark since the gentleman spoke. I forgot his name. And that is, so are all of these places, can they do some type of measure? Like, in other words, do we assume that they could do something to get the half rate? Like, or are there some places like there's really nothing you can do about it, I guess?
Well, that's a great question. So it'd be on a case-by-case basis. There's certainly some parcels or some properties that they have the space to implement a stormwater control measure that would give them that credit. There's also the question that, we've heard response back is, okay, what's the return on investment? I spend this money on a stormwater control measure, when am I going to make that money back based on my discount?
Never.
Well, I mean, it could be 10, 15, 20 years. That's, and there are some places that they're built out and, their only option would be to go back in with permeable pavement or an underground system. And so, it's a case by case, depends on the property. Some properties have the space, some properties are built out.
And any new construction would have to have stormwater if it's over an acre, correct?
Any new construction that's not redevelopment and does not increase, and increases the impervious area. So the state, they passed a law several years ago that any redevelopment that does not increase the impervious area is not required to treat for stormwater. Another aspect of this is, if you think about stormwater management as a whole and post-construction stormwater management, in our community, it's been, maybe 15, 20 years that we've been requiring post-construction. So there's 100 years of development that there's no post-construction stormwater management, there's no controls, and there's not a possibility, we can't go back and require people to do that. So that's a lot of area that's discharging stormwater that is not treated in any way. It's basically our responsibility to make sure that it drains properly, and then there's the pollution side, which is also an important factor.
And just to point out, as an enterprise fund, it is governed by the North Carolina General Assembly, and we only have certain things that we can spend the money on, and that's all regulated.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So,
Our auditors would tell us if we did it wrong.
Right.
and I think it was slide 3 or 4, and that's directly from the general statute. And, I understand that there should be clear, outlines on, I think it's the next slide, on what constitutes maintaining stormwater and, and the program, because that could be, considered as a vague description, providing management programs and structural and natural stormwater drainage system service. So we could go above and beyond and put together a list of stuff, but at the same time, stormwater is a broad topic, a broad issue for the community, and there's various aspects, like I mentioned, leaf collection and things like that, that directly benefits the stormwater program. Whether or not we're going to pay for it completely out of stormwater, or if there's a percentage, is a decision to be made. But there needs to be justification for that, of why it's part of the stormwater program.
Damaged and failing infrastructure is going to have to be paid for somehow.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's the thing that everybody has to understand.
Right, and we've been passing the buck for a very long time. Right, so we've just basically put our heads in the sand for a long time.
Yeah, the question we get is why are we addressing this now? And, the good answer to that is because it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be repaired, or we're just going to continue down the rabbit hole of sinkholes and, flooding and things like that.
They don't want to get more expensive.
If we did the 250, but we eliminated the credit, or people that have done the credits, do they get penalized by us reducing it, or would they still be coming out okay because there's a 250 cap?
So there's a number of property owners that are not in that 250 cap that have control measures in place. So, there's 120 so control measures, that was the last time I looked, so there's probably 130 we've had to be able to develop in the last couple of years. So there's that. several properties have multiple stormwater control measures, so there's probably 70 to 75 property owners that have stormwater control measures. So there'd be another 25 or 30 properties that don't fall, that would not be affected or eligible for that 250 cap, that would have spent money on a stormwater control measure, that if you eliminated the credit, they would not be able to receive that credit for what they've done.
And would that be more or less than 250?
Would the credit be?
Right, would the
Their
credit be,
ultimate bill.
would the credit, or
So
they
their
saving more
ultimate
money
bill-
with the credit, or saving more money with the 250 cap?
Sorry,
Probably
Could you
would
repeat
just
that?
depend on the size of the property.
Right, and isn't that what you're kind of asking, Jeff?
He's
Yeah, I'm
say,
trying to
like,
say, are we penalizing people that have
would
done
they
stuff?
Right.
have, like, if they had
Or we're not rewarding them
control
appropriately?
measures in
Yeah.
place
Well, that's
already,
kind of why I was saying
would
you
your
could
bill be
do
less than
either
250?
greater discount for them.
I understand what you're saying. So that's part of what the discussion we've had internally and what we're talking with right now is, okay, if you do a 250 credit, or 250 cap, there's 50 property owners that are eligible for that cap. Their bill each month would be $250. Do you want them then to receive a 50%? Because there's I don't know the exact number, I could go look, but a number of those also have stormwater control measures. So do you want them to then get the credit and have a $125 a month fee? Or do you say, okay, if you get the credit, or if you get the cap, you're not eligible for the credit, but if you don't get the cap, you are eligible for the credit. Because there's another 30 or so properties under that 250, they would not be eligible for the cap that have stormwater control measures in
But those
place.
people, would their bill already be less than 250 anyway, is what he's asking.
Yeah, it would be less than 250 already, and then they would get a credit, and they would be, half of whatever
So
they're.
you either get which one ever is less.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
That seems to be the fair.
That's what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say, is that how we could do it?
You're either
Because
capped
I
at
don't want
250 or
Penalize. You get a
you can use
choice.
your credit whichever one is less.
Yeah, because I think what Jeff's trying to say is that if you have somebody whose bill would have been 400 and they qualify for the credit, now their bill's 200 instead of the 250.
Yes.
So in that case, they would take the credit, not the cap.
We can certainly offer that as an
Which is
option.
a little
Say,
bit more work
based
for
on your
Thank
bill,
you
your
guys.
situation, do you want the credit or do you want the cap? Because there's gonna be, out of that 50, like I said, there's a number of them that don't have a stormwater control measure in place.
Right.
And so they would be like, I want the cap. And there's probably some that are close to that a little over 250 that like, oh, I want the credit because it's gonna put me down into the hundreds, or like 100 something.
Will you put that slide back up that had the amounts? That was a really specific statement.
I think she meant the cap scenario.
The numbers, you want the numbers?
It's not as much as the audit.
That's a cap scenario.
The one with the numbers? So the only thing is if we went with 250, I don't feel comfortable doing 250 indefinitely.
Right.
Well, they even suggested that.
So,
Then you really did.
Right,
Tier
because,
up.
honestly, you're funding you're cutting into the, what do we call that? Drainage assistance program with that. Or funding your 2 employees who are working under you. I mean, those are the funds that are funding that. I'm just saying that that amount of money could be funding those employees.
True, yeah.
Yeah.
so do we establish a period of time and then if there's a reevaluation, or how do you set that up?
So actually, the council could, say we're gonna do we'll set the cap and do, I would suggest, and Mike and Brian kick me, but maybe a two-year pilot program. Because just knowing with engineering and those kind of things, it'll take a while to develop the projects all the way out. So
Certainly, yeah.
And that's still over
Is
a $500,000
2 years enough
deficit though.
For you
You know
to get
what
a
I mean?
feel?
That's a tricky question. I mean, in 2 years, at the rate we're going, we're gonna have a lot of CIP projects identified, and some of those are $1 million+ projects. So, that just pushes those farther down on when we can tackle those projects. So like, if at 2 years, we're like,
But then from the stakeholder standpoint, we have the CIP, right?
and we'll have a much better developed CIP at that point too.
At that
in 2
point,
years.
yeah,
And we
we
can
can
say,
really-
okay, well, maybe we don't need to keep raising it, or maybe we say, all right, well, we're just gonna go no cap anymore, That's all options for council.
Can we go back to the credits just for a second? So you said, so based on the stormwater measure that they put in, are there like varying levels of that? Where it's like no matter what stormwater measure you put in, you get the 50%? But I would assume that some are better than others.
Well, that's a good question. So the stormwater control measures that are put in the city have to go through an engineering review. They have to submit a stormwater management permit plan to the city. And there are requirements of how much runoff, quantity and quality, how they treat that. So they're all designed to meet that standard. And obviously, there's some practices that are more efficient at removing pollutants, or some that are more environmentally, friendly is not the word, but they accrue bioretention cells, or green infrastructure. People could say that's better, that's more what we want as a community. Some communities will say you can get 20% for meeting your water quality standard. You can get 20% for meeting your water quantity standpoint. You get a 10% credit for going above and beyond what you're required. Some communities say you don't get a credit unless you go above and beyond what you're required to treat. That makes things a lot more complicated on our end, staff time, keeping track of all that. And I think what we've heard from the community and from council is that if somebody spent the money and the time to put a control measure in and meet our requirements, they deserve to be recognized and deserve to be rewarded, is not the word, but compensated for that under this program. So technically, yes, some practices are better than others, but from a credit standpoint, I think what makes most sense to me is a simple credit program where if you have your control and it's maintained and functioning, we will offer you the credit. Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question? If there's a control measure in place,
Yes.
how is that person different than just a resident? Like that control measure, does that pretty much take care of the storm water?
No, it treats, it's designed based on the size of the storm. So there's design requirements in our ordinance that says that it has to remove 85% of total suspended solids from the runoff, which a finished site, there should be a lot of sediment in the runoff. But it also has to treat quantity based on storm events. So a 1-year, 24 storm, it's intensity, duration, and frequency. So that creates a certain amount of runoff from a site. And they have to treat for, I think it's the 2-year 24-hour event and the 10-year 24-hour event. They have to basically make sure that the peak discharge rate off of the site is equal to or less than the pre-development rate. So if it's a forested site, that storm comes and X amount of water leaves the site as runoff. Well, if you cut that acre of forest down and put a building lot, you're going to have a lot more water leaving the site. So the stormwater facility is designed to hold that for a certain period of time and slowly discharge it off of the site, close to what the rate was prior to development. And then there's some, there's a caveat in there for pollutants. Here, we're only required to treat for sediment, but there's other, nitrogen, phosphorus, things like that can be in there, which also the settling time in the facility, the control measure, allows for some of those pollutants to be, either to fall out of the water to the bottom or be uptake by plants, depending on the treatment measure.
That was a very good 2-minute explanation. Thank you. That was great.
I would like to recommend, because I think we can go around and around this, I would like to recommend a 250 cap or a 50% credit for a period of 2 years.
Any objections to that?
I think we should be a little higher, but
That's why I just want to leave it for 2 years. I want to see,
Right.
look at that difference.
It's going to be
huge.
if that's right, that's $500,000 in 2 years that we could really use, And we don't totally know how many people are, part of this is we don't know exactly how many people are
No,
actually.
I agree with everything you're saying. I really do. It's just, there's so many uncertainties right now, and coming off of a kind of unique year of 2020. I think we get our legs under us, and they themselves said, we understand it's going to go up. And it probably will. I think we all know it will. And I didn't come in ready to really drop it to this point either until I've heard all of this. And I like the part of you get either or, you don't get both. I was worried about both. Either or.
I'm into you all.
He's like, oh my God.
No, I saw the letter to the chambers, and I agree with all of those comments. From a program manager standpoint, full implementation and full budget would be great, but understanding, this is an impact to the community, I understand they want to see what their return on investment is. You all want to make a responsible decision as far as setting the rates, so 250 I told John this when we had the discussion, it's not going to kill the program. It's not going to kill our plans for capital improvements. It might set us back a couple years. It might not have an impact. At this point in time, we can't really tell. But we know that we need to make improvements, and this is how we get to a standpoint where we can do that. And so, no, I don't think that's a bad recommendation at all.
I'm comfortable with that.
Ms. George?
Jeff, can you repeat that recommendation one more time? So we
Do I need to just make a motion or a recommendation?
No,
Just a recommendation.
Just recommendation.
I'd like to recommend that we use the $250 cap or a 50% credit, whichever the groups that fall in that category for a period of 2 years.
And then
We'll come back to the table and reevaluate.
Any objection to that?
we will take that and put that into your budget planning and bring that back to you and share that with you at your May workshop, and ultimately we would approve that as part of the budget ordinance when we adopt the budget.
I'd like to thank the chamber. That was, they didn't yell at us. They didn't come in and test us. They worked great with Mike. I like it when that happens.
Well, I just want to say how much I appreciate the work you've done, Mike. That slideshow was very thorough, and I think it answered a lot of questions, and I hope our friends at the chamber realize the work that you're doing and that you've been listening to them over the last year. So thank you.
Mike, we always love it.
I was somewhere the other day, I was like, I like to butter them up with the, Girl Scout painting the murals, and I'll come back with the rates. John, thank you. Brian, all the city staff, thank you all. You've all been super supportive. Council, I love working for the city. It's been a great experience, and you guys make it that way because, you support the stuff that we bring to you, and you're not just like, well, that's not happening. So thank you for working with me. It's been a long process. We're still working on it, but so thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Am I good?
You're good?
Great. Thanks, y'all. Have a great night.
Somehow he makes stormwater fun.
Yes.
I'm so
No.
proud of him.
And the audit.
Thanks, Mom. I would be so proud. I know. I want to send her a letter.
All right, that concludes our